Anyway, this is going to take several little snippets of video, so I'm not too worried about trying to capture the fact that my battery's a little low here. This is A Habit of Victory, and as discussed on the game box, this is a game about Polish nuns. This is another one of the Zucker operational games, and this is a new series, or fairly new, called Series 2X, and I don't know where it's from. I think 2012, because of that 012 there. Okay. What about it? Well, we recently played Napoleon at Bay. This design is somewhere between, not between. It includes much of the base rules from Napoleon at Bay. And I'm not going to go over those, although I will skim and say, hey, this is the same as Napoleon at Bay. I'm not going to, bust through the main description of the flow of the game. The 2X rules are very, very much, although I haven't looked at these recently, like the rules to, I think, 1809. Just got to be here somewhere. Up there, the Victory Games. And Struggle of Nations, although Struggle of Nations has some weirdness to do with the tiny hexes, but otherwise, yeah, it's going to be the same kind of rules, which basically says, hey, we're playing Napoleon at Bay with some add-ons, a little bit of complexity, and then throw into that a different combat system. Okay. Personally, I think the charm of Napoleon at Bay may have been its simple, very, very clean-cut design. It took the base principles, stated them fairly clearly, and presented them in a way that didn't create a lot of headaches. And what we saw when I looked at 6 Days of Glory, which is a little different, slightly different system, uses kind of a more standard CRT rather than this retreat and pursuit damage. We saw that it contained a lot of little clunky bits to it that I feel like dragged it down. And people who had complaints maybe about the Napoleon at Bay combat system and wanted a standard CRT probably feel like it's a simplification from that point of view. Oh, there it is, 6 Days of Glory. Zoomed in, stuck between Waterloo and Kutuzov. Anyway, they probably felt it was a simplification that way. I felt like it had other elements that got into a little more detail. The little walled farms, of course it's at a different scale, so those make a little bit more sense. This, I'm not sure what scale this is. This is supposedly twice the size. I think this is, I haven't checked, Napoleon at Bay's hex size or whatever, but I think this is supposed to be and a further step back from the Napoleon at Bay and all the earlier systems. And there was actually a game that handled this, and it was a much larger game. As you can see, we've got kind of a small map here to handle the whole thing. Now, the map is unfortunately not as clear and easy to read as the Napoleon at Bay map. It may be more like the 6 Days map, which of course caused me trouble. There's sort of this blending. It's very pretty, but it also kind of looks more like a piece of art than something that's really blurting that information out and conveying it well. Which means it requires more study to try to find the road lines and how important they are and stuff like that. Well, what's interesting about this one is they make these 2 times rules. And one of the other factors is, hey, the strength points of the units, they're down to 3 and 6 instead of 4 and 8. And pretty much everybody of importance holds 6s, and all these major generals can only hold units that have 3 strength points on them. And if you don't understand the organization chart or the normal command system, I refer you to Napoleon at Bay. I don't know if I covered them as well when I did Battle for Italy, which is really a tiny game and uses the same system, but it really doesn't compare in terms of the scope. This probably does, although the size of the map shrinks it down to that 6 days map, which I felt was a little too crowded. I liked the grand scope of the Napoleon at Bay map, the feeling that I had a lot of space to play around in and stuff. So I probably favor the old series over the new, but what I've found in the past is that, and the 2X rules contain all of this, all the extra chrome that's added on actually made me enjoy them less. I felt like I had a very clean maneuver game with Napoleon at Bay in a way that, you know, the rules are probably as simple as Battle for Italy's, although they're presented better because they're not on one sheet of paper that you have to fold every which way. Well, the rules are not quite that simple, but they're close. And overall, it felt like a very clean system that didn't have a lot of clutter in it. The other ones, I've always felt bogged down and more frozen with the, oh, what the hell do I do? Now, having just played Napoleon at Bay, maybe I can face these a little bit better. I don't know. I think I tried that experiment before with 1809 and kind of said, but 1809 is a funny situation. It's kind of, and then there's the grand headache of Struggle of Nations with its board in pieces. But we'll get to that later. But after reading through the standard rules, what happens is a significant portion of them, and you'll notice the exclusive rules are thicker than the standard rules. That's maybe not terribly unusual in something like blue and gray. Standard rules are 16 pages, not too different from Napoleon at Bay. You figure, hey, maybe 4 or 5 more pages. No, of course, the scenario book's in here too, essentially. So you have a few pages here. But the exclusive rules go another 22 pages. Wow, that's a lot of stuff to add on. No, it's worse than that. Among other things, they take the command system and throw these cards into it. Now, I can understand designing a system that uses cards, and it looks interesting, but basically I'm here reading this, saying, this all looks the same, and then I finish feeling like, okay, you know, this really feels like 1809 or whatever, some of those earlier games. It really, there are some differences from Napoleon at Bay, but I felt like I absorbed them, and then I get into this, and instead of command points, you just have like a deck of cards. So like if you have 15 command points, instead you have 15 cards. And they're used in some very, very different sorts of ways. They're not just expend a card as a command point, in which case they'd be pointless. They affect some other things, and we'll take a look at how. But among other things, they have an event on them, which I think you can play as part of your card play. But you can choose not to. And then they also have this little chart, which is going to determine your attrition cost. So the attrition chart is baked into the card that you play to move. Well, what about initiative movement? Yeah, that works a little different too. And we'll get to the specifics in a little bit. But basically, you must play one card each turn. And anybody who moves not on a card play is affected by that card. That card that you play is allowed to move one of your units. Basically, the first card you play in a turn moves a unit, and then it determines the attrition table for all your other units that move during the initiative phase. Kind of weird. I think it also determines the movement allowance that you have. I believe that's what this up here is, this 3/4, 5 in parentheses. I think that's saying like infantry. I have to look, but I think it's like infantry, cav, and then forced march or something like that. I don't know. We'll find the specifics when we hit that. Okay, and that just applies to all of your units that move under initiative, which means you have to spend a resource every turn. You can't hoard them all the time. Maybe the chart that generates them is a little friendlier. And then you also have to, you have like a different chart based on those cards. Now, it still is affected by the amount of points or cards that you have in your hand and all kind of stuff like that. So a lot of the concepts are still there. It's just there's something a little weird there. There's also 9 different types of weather. Now, this covers a large span of time for the whole campaign, from 1807 to now. I know it goes through the winter, but like it starts in December. We're going to do the grain campaign, of course, or as much of it as we can stomach. But then it goes all the way to Friedland. Well, actually, we have the turn record charts here. It goes all the way until June. So from December to June. So this is a big amount of time, and that's 70 turns about. Because I don't want to say 69, dude. Another little grump, setting up the units. Of course, I couldn't find where everything goes. Now, I remembered seeing something while I was looking at this that says, oh, some of these, oh, I know what I saw. I haven't seen anything in the rules about it, but over here, one of my little counter, like I clip pieces off the counter sheet for them. Well, one of them says, what if units? So I think my assumption is anything I couldn't figure out what to do is a what the fuck unit, and I just throw it in a bag. I cannot find any rules on those units, any way to add them to the game or whatever. Maybe they get, you know, included through some magazine article, or maybe you just make up rules. Maybe they come in through a card. I have no idea. Some of them seem pretty standard. Like, I don't know, like Sewell's main unit, right? This is something that can hold up to 9 strength points. Well, there's no room for 9 strength points on the track. I don't know. Oh, you flip it over to the +6 side. Okay, so it can hold up to 9 strength points, and I don't know. It doesn't start the game, and like Napoleon at Bay, if you lose a unit, it's gone from the game. However, unlike Napoleon at Bay, there's these little march units that you can sort of use to hold small amounts of troops in so that you can move your replacement counters around, and they seem to still operate as fighting units from what I recall of the rules. Now, we'll burn through them a little harder than maybe my reading went. Part of the problem for me is, hey, you know, I read through this, felt like I learned the game, started looking at the exclusive rules, and wow, you're taking my rules back away. What the hell? One interesting little thing about this is one of the designers is Mark Herman. Worked in with Kevin Zucker on this. And I think the cards are his kind of idea and contribution. I don't know if other games in the 2X series have the cards, in which case, gee, you'd think you'd bake them into the standard rules. Or if it was just, hey, this is a special one-off with Mark Herman, so we'll throw cards in. Or it could have been a test run, see how it works, and, you know, maybe some of the others will have it. All right, I have to switch batteries. I guess we can look at some of the terrain features briefly. I get one of the most important ones. There's this towpath which runs along here. This is part of the exclusive rules for the game. It's essentially the means by which French supply is making it to Warsaw. I guess that's about it. All right, we'll swap batteries and we'll come back and start hitting the rules themselves. Okay, let's attack the standard rules, not as I said in their completeness, but with the understanding, looking through it at the lens of Napoleon at Bay, and then how did the system change? Most of this is really, other than the scale difference, is really the changes that come into play in this system back around 1980, you know? All right, so there's two things that are added to the Napoleon at Bay: artillery and vedettes. Vedettes are going, you saw them in, you saw artillery as well, in 6 Days of Glory. The vedettes are going to allow you to kind of put screens up. And they look like this. They have this little, and they're just a half strength point in place. Unlike 6 Days of Glory, if you happen to watch the misery that I put myself through with that, and that I fear this is going to be like, you don't break down regular units to turn them into vedettes. You just get some vedettes. And that's a little bit more appealing because I couldn't figure out why anyone would break things down. I could not figure out a usage for them that was so valuable that you'd give up a strength point to get a handful of them, really. Artillery, well, we're going to see how that works here. It doesn't work the way it does in 6 Days. What it does is it has its own separate bombardment phase. And the combat system has changed significantly from the Napoleon at Bay side. You also have a core idea of hidden movement. All units are going to be flipped over. Now, I've got them all face up, and I'm not sure that I'm actually going to use the hidden movement, but I'll account for it in my own little solo-ish way. Which is to say, I don't want to go through the mechanical aspects of flipping all the counters and then peeking at them to see what I have and then transferring and trying to figure out what's on the charts and this, that, and the other. By the way, you'll notice some of the things are upside down on the chart. Those are guys who, I'm not sure he's where he belongs, but those are guys who are reinforcements. And I don't want to confuse myself by seeing all kind of troops that are reinforcements on the showing up, you know, on my track. There are some other problems, but we'll get to that in a moment. Okay. Well, obviously, you have a random weather phase. You're going to roll to see how many admin points you have, and then you get to go through some administrative type functionality with your supply sources. And remember, they're out of your center of operations is out of command, is out of operations when it's moving. One difference here is, first of all, there's depots, which are these little green things, which I think are only French, but I'm not sure. And we got some up here. And then there's also the supply sources themselves, and you're allowed to trace. So this is kind of weird. There was some place where it made it sound like you're allowed to trace commands from the supply source itself, and then someplace else where it kind of said the opposite. And then, but you're definitely able to trace your supply from the active supply sources. Okay. You have your standard, you know, you can move by spending initiatives. And this is not assuming those cards. This rule book doesn't assume them at all. They're a whole replacement of that system. And your initiative movement that follows afterwards. And then also afterwards, you get to play around, roll some dice, see if you get to build bridges or deploy your pontoons or whatever. Okay. Then the second player gets his forced march attempt, just like Napoleon at Bay. He gets to make a roll for his initiative, see if he can make it. He's got a more expensive attrition table, and I believe you have to play a card to do this under the new rules, but we'll see. And then you go to battle, and battle's a little different. The core is kind of the same. You define a force that's attacking. You must attack all adjacent units. You don't have, I sometimes misstate this. You don't have to attack with all your units. In fact, you're disallowed from attacking with units of more than one force, but forces can be in hexes adjacent to their leader. So you could actually have like a 3-hex force attacking one hex of the enemy. Other forces can be sitting around in the zone of control of the enemy, and they'll have an effect on the battle in terms of presenting that zone of control. The zones of control are a little different in this because of the range. Okay, now this is interesting because this particular role, the combat role, is written with these cards in mind. When you have a card, it doesn't say anything. Shit. Okay. Very, very interesting. Okay, there's one. So this says pitched on it. This says pitched on it. Basically, if you have a card that says pitched, and I think the cards that don't have pitched are the opposite. They're the non-pitched battles. When you play a card that says pitched battle, and this is very similar to the older rules, not Napoleon at Bay, but the rules in 1809 and Struggle of Nations, if I recall them correctly, and probably a whole bunch of others in the OSG line, had the idea of, if you lose the battle, you have to pick pitched or pursuit battle before the battle starts. And then if you lose the battle in either of the two immediately following rounds, whichever choice you picked is in play. So if you picked a pitched battle, that means you stick around and you take casualties. If you take a pursuit battle, you follow a casualty system that's similar to Napoleon at Bay's, which is that you withdraw and then your casualties will be based upon what your enemy, how far they pursue. So if they don't succeed in pursuing you very far, you're still going to take a minimum equal to theirs, same as Napoleon at Bay. But the difference is, if you pick the pitched battle, that means you get to counterattack. Well, not necessarily. That means you go to another round of combat. And the person who didn't attack last gets to attack now. Now, on a counterattack, you have slightly different requirements. You don't have to attack every unit that's adjacent to you. You can actually just pick one hex and attack that. But you have to attack something with all your units that were attacked. And that is most of it. But there are some little differences. First of all, you'll be using a card for these. And what's not clear here is, I don't think that card's expended. But if you don't have any that have pitched on them, are you allowed to use that? Well, the option here is, or you can simply declare your battle type selection now. I don't know what. It's like, are these linked to the cards in any way? In which case, you're allowed to pick pitched battles whenever you like, but, and there's a limit to how many you can pick. Or is that just a convenience because the old games had chits, and instead of that, we've written pitched on some of the cards and not on others? I have no idea. Okay, there's going to be a modifier based on the cav differential. If you have more cav than the opponent, you'll get that. And we'll get to these modifiers in a moment. Then you fire your artillery. And the artillery is, and both sides get to do this, the artillery is a chance to do some casualties before the actual battle resolution takes place. Let's see if we have the charts somewhere. Okay, so here's probably where everything is. Okay. And you resolve that by counting up the amount of artillery, you roll a die, and that's how many hits you do. We have your normal administrative pool table, the initiative comparison for getting away out of a hex. Communication is going to tell you how far their dispatch is. And it's always 12 movement points in this. No, French have, 28 and Prussians 14. Yeah. So that perhaps simplifies things. Okay, movement here. And then here's your main combat chart. And what were we looking up? We were looking up to see what the cav differential does. And we do not see it on the charts. So we also don't see it referenced in the sequence of play, of course. That would be too much work. It's kind of interesting. There are a lot of references. So every paragraph in the game has its own number. You got to get kind of used to this. There's a main numbering system. So this is like section 1, whatever that is, which is not the sequence of play. And section 1A is the lines of communication. And then paragraph number 55, it's kind of like the Bible or something, handle something. That makes it much easier to reference specific locations in the rules, and it can be very, very helpful. Okay. So we kind of discussed the flow of the battle. The only thing I want to do is I want to get to, the zone of control's changed as well. I want to get to the cav effect. Okay, so if you have 2-to-1 cav, you subtract 1 from the bombardment die roll on the artillery fire table, which is good. You're able to force their infantry into squares, your bombardment has a better effect. That makes sense. Okay. I want to look a little bit at zones of control because I think they changed in flavor a little bit here. So entering a zone of control costs an extra half movement point. That's new, I believe. And then if you entered a zone of control, you can immediately exit it, and you can actually go from one zone of control to another. But exiting them costs another half movement point unless you're all cav or vedettes. However, if two forces, when do you define a force? Well, I think it's kind of whenever you like. So I would say hexes. Exert zones into the same hex, they create a bond which makes you have to stop moving. It's a totally locking zone of control. Okay, we have the cav differential. Now the cav differential affects the combat, as we said, with the artillery, but it also affects your pursuit chance. I believe it adds 1 to what? Yeah, it adds or subtracts 1 to the resistance that you get on the initiative comparison. And I believe you can get down to a -1 on that if you have a very good leader. I'm not positive. Okay. Standard rules for March attrition, so the attrition rules get affected by the exclusive rules to this game, which is kind of weird. Normally you take attrition even if you don't move during your normal movement. In the exclusive rules to this game, that's not the case. You can sit on the board forever, with the exception of certain weather types. Outside, and you will not get hurt. Somebody will bring you food or whatever. And that is because only units that move have to use the attrition table on the card. And I mean, it's not like I'm missing something in terms of, oh, well, maybe some rule is worded a little funny. No, it's very explicit that you do not pay attrition. You don't make an attrition check if you don't move. Pursuit Only happens if it's not a pitched battle. Remember, a pitched battle, they're going to be coming back and you're going to get hit again, or one side. Whichever side didn't attack last gets to attack. And only the loser's choice between pitched and pursuit matters. So if you win a round, it doesn't matter what you picked. However, there's a limit to how many times you can pick pitched. Let's take a look at that. So first of all, across certain terrains, you can't pick pitched battle. If you have an initiative of 2 or less, you may only pick pitched battle once during the battle. If you have an initiative greater than 2, you can do 2 rounds of pitched battle. I think that's picking the card, or the choice, which is to say that it's not the case that you have to be affected by it, which I find kind of disturbing, but okay. So if you pick pitched battle and win, and pick pitched battle and win, well, now you're stuck picking pursuit from the rest of the time. And if you do lose, you end up falling back on a pursuit. Obviously, there can never be more than 4 rounds to a battle. And you just go through the whole cycle, well, the whole setup again. So if I attacked you and beat you and you picked pitched, then you're going to counterattack me. And, you know, if you beat me and I picked pitched, then I get to attack you again. And it can happen up to 4 times. You know, I make 2 attacks, you make 2 attacks, which will resolve the artillery fire phases and the normal combat chart, which is hidden far away from the artillery for some strange, I'm sure, space reasons, but okay. Same kind of multi-force pursuit rules, etc. All right, so if both sides, so if the total losses of a battle, including pursuit, and the losing force loses more than 3 strength points, the winning player rolls a die, adds the winner's losses to the die roll result, and if it's less than or equal to how many strength points the losing side lost, you add the winning side's losses. If the total is less than or equal to the amount of points that the losing side lost, the winning player gets a point of morale in his favor. This is just like Napoleon at Bay. And now, if you capture a leader with a 6 or more command span, which is the 3rd number on the leadership, it's how many things they can command, or one who has a star on him, like Napoleon, you get a point in that case in your favor as well, except if Napoleon is captured, the coalition has the option to automatically win an operational victory, or they take 2 spaces on the morale chart, their choice. If at the end of any combat in which, okay, we didn't talk about staking the old guard. So if you fail to win the round of combat after staking the old guard, you lose a point of morale. Now, what's up with staking the old guard? Is that an optional rule? I think it is. Okay. So if multiple pitched battles are happening on the same turn, they have to proceed in parallel, sort of. You resolve one step of one, you resolve one step of another one. Well, I'm sorry. You resolve, what is it? How do they work it? All the attacks and counterattacks before going to round 2. So basically, and there are only 2 rounds, right? Is that reasonable? What do they call round 1 and round 2? Yeah, there are only 2 rounds of combat. So you resolve an attack, counterattack on one battle, which could result in a pursuit. And then you go to the next battle, do the attack, counterattack, if that's going on. Then the next one, then the next one. And once you've resolved all the battles for one set of attacks and counterattacks that may break early, then you go and resolve the next set. And there can only be 2 sets of attack counterattacks by my understanding here. If you take too many losses in a pitched battle and you can't take them all, you automatically take a pursuit result instead. Even if you picked pitched, you end up routing. And then instead of just being destroyed, you might actually survive, but the enemy gets to advance, which could be more of a problem if you're like trying to screen with small forces or something. Okay. The effects of morale will be... Okay. So this is kind of interesting. This is the same, strangely enough, as Napoleon at Bay, which felt like a very specific rule to the game. One of the modifiers to the attrition die roll. You have the bonus for the star. Weather might have an effect. If you're force marching, the extra movement points are added to the die roll. I don't remember that being present in Napoleon at Bay. I may have forgotten about that. But also, you deal with the current morale. Well, gosh, that sends me back to 170, which is another rule. This is like a choose your own adventure. It's choose your own rules, right? That's leadership. That's not what it wanted to send me to. Hey, we got the staking the old guard here. Maybe we should go back to that. That doesn't seem like an optional. So, okay. Morale affects attrition, but we can't find the right paragraph for that. Maybe it's here on the March attrition table. Okay. So here's what it is. You add 1 if the current Paris morale level is negative. Maybe it's the idea that the conquered territories are, I don't know, rising up against Napoleon. I'm not sure. I really don't know what it's supposed to represent here. It made a lot more sense in France in the Napoleon at Bay situation, where the French had an advantage in terms of their attrition checks because of... So they didn't get penalized on the die roll for attrition. What they got penalized on was the column in which they took the attrition. But it may work out exactly the same because the chart's a little different here. So here, well, it is still column. Here you look up... what the hell? Gosh. This chart isn't making sense to me. Because you look up the action points, but then it's got the army here, and that doesn't seem to be there. How to use. For use in battle scenarios only. Begin on the line labeled Army, selecting either French or Coalition. You will use that column... Oh, okay. All right, so these are just to indicate how much supply the 2 armies have in the battle scenarios. So what you do is you look up your action points, and there's actually no bonus for the French here. And you'll get some size number, and that'll get you to an attrition number. Right? Let's see. This looks different. Roll 1 die and find the die roll result on the line corresponding to the march distance. Okay. Well, 1 die looks like 2 dice, but it's the modified die roll, so there's... Oh, yeah, it's the modified die roll, so you could be adding up to 5 on it, which means if you roll a 7, naturally you get a 12. Maybe there's another addition in there. Let's see, French get 1, You get to subtract for liters. Force march, it's 1 for each movement point that you force march. And then you add for the weather. So weather could be bad. Okay. So yeah, you could end up getting a 12. So you roll the die and compare it to the distance that you marched. And if it's infantry, it's a different distance than cav. I don't know how you coordinate those if it's a mixed force. I guess use the worst table out of the two. And then you'll get a roll. You look down and you compare it to the size of the force and the action points or administrative points that you have. And then you find a cross-reference between the die roll and the line that indicates how many action points and how big your force is. If you're completely out of supply and communications, you'll be on the 0 column in terms of how many action points you have. And then you'll get a number, and that's how many strength points you lose. Okay. It's a different mechanism in a different chart, but same general effect, except the die roll's up here instead of on a separate chart. And I'm not sure what the net difference is, but it's probably designed to create the same overall effect. All right, so let's go to the Old Guard, since we have that as a special rule here. The Old Guard, you include their combat strength in normal battles. However, you can choose to stake them in the battle. If you, as the French, if you stake the Old Guard, as long as 1 point of Old Guard infantry is in the attacking force, that means that you'll modify the die roll by a -1 in your favor as the attacker. Yeah, it has to be as the attacker. And the Old Guard takes the first strength point of losses that you suffer. And you're almost always going to suffer losses. So, if you look at the chart, you can see that'll normally be the case. But the problem here is, so it automatically becomes a pursuit battle as well. And remember, the risk here, in addition to it being a pursuit battle, in which case you could lose right away, is if you didn't win, well, then you lost. It is binary in this case. The morale track gets marked 1 towards the coalition. So, the Old Guard did not lose in this campaign. They didn't lose supposedly any time up until Waterloo. So, you should be careful doing it, I guess. All right, that is the so-called standard rules. Now we go to a much larger set of much more confusing rules because they're largely new and they handle these cards, and then they also handle the specifics of the campaign. So we'll jump to those. And we spent a lot of time on this, but it did help me learn, looking at the charts and everything. When I'm reading, I don't really look at the charts and I just kind of skim through stuff. So it helps me. I don't know if it's useful to any of you. And to some extent, I don't know that I care. It helps me to explain it. Okay, let's start working our way through what really is the majority of the rules here. The exclusive rules. Okay, to begin with, for each corps there's 1 corps level. Okay, so this is the units I couldn't understand. There's 1 corps level organic combat unit. These are substitute units and they can also function. Okay, so I think these suckers are actually excess units that I'm allowed to use kind of at will. They're the Corps Commander's units. I can pull them on and off the board. They don't get destroyed like the individual units do, and they can hold a lot of troops. So unlike Napoleon at Bay, each unit actually has a number of numbers on it, and I don't know what they are. Oh, this is the subordination rating, I bet. Okay. So the first number is how many strength points that unit can possibly hold. The third number over here is how far it can move, its movement allowance. And I think the middle number is how much it costs to subordinate the unit. So like this costs nothing, but it's a vedette. It's useless on your thing. But here, this unit's going to cost me 2 to subordinate, but it can hold 5 strength points. And some of the bigger units can also hold larger amounts. And that's kind of, the missing units seem to come from that. Now I still have missing leaders. I have Poniatowski, who I thought should be around. And then I have like leaders who are marked as replacements, like Victor here. Maybe if I lose a leader I can use him. But Savarai is actually used in this scenario, so I'm kind of confused as to why some are replacements and some are not. Maybe we'll see more of that in here. Again, I kind of skim things and don't really see. Okay, so now here. Oh, crap. All right. So this gets more confusing, because the scenario describes things as coming in with these guys. The substitute units seem to be the smaller units. There's an organic unit and 1 or more divisional level substitute units. The substitutes can be put in play during the command phase where its organic unit is, and these can break you up, but if a division level unit is of a different... it must remain on the display. If a named Major General counter is in play, he must command his own division. I assume if his division's on place. Now, these guys don't come into play in general. So I, again, don't know what they mean by in play. I guess maybe if they're on the organization chart, I can use them to command their own division or something like that. It's not well worded, and I don't really get it. But I'll try to fudge things. It looks like I've got the option to use this counter or to use the breakdown units, and, you know, I'll try to figure out. So like Davout here can hold 9 strength points. Well, Davout has 3 units that each take up 1 of his command rating, which is 5. Well, he could use the Davout unit, which holds just as much strength, but only takes up 2 of his command points. Which makes sense when you think of it from an organizational point of view, but it's not absolutely clear what they mean in the rules here. So I'll just fudge that as much as I can. There are major generals with 2 stars on them. They got to command their own units if their own units are around. If their units aren't around, I guess you can use them as major generals in their corps or something. One nice thing about this set is that they've got the corps color coordinated. So you could actually see, you know, who's supposed to be with what pretty easily. And that helps in terms of sorting and preparing and setting up. Also, most of the counters are kind of readable in a way that they weren't before. So, for example, in Napoleon at Bay, you'd have like, I don't know, Bernadotte would just say Bernadotte, and he'd have a 1 on him, and it would be in the tiniest little font possible. And also the unit names were in really tiny. They did not use their printing capability as well, although printing was sometimes more difficult, you know, so maybe in order to make sure their counters ended up where they were. So Davout has to command his own corps, but he can detach his divisions. Now something weird happens later, and I haven't seen any rules about this, but I didn't see these either. I just kind of skimmed it. I remember reading it. But so for example, Lannes starts out, I think, with the reserve corps, but he ends up taking over the 5th Corps, and I don't know what that means in terms of Messina. Or wait, maybe Lannes comes in with the 5th Corps? I don't know. Yeah, I think Lon starts out in charge of the 5th Corps, although he only has reserve on him. And then Messena takes it over and Lon becomes the reserve corps. We'll fudge those kind of things. I don't think that they're a really big deal to understanding how the game works and what it's meant to reflect. Because the command decisions that were made, while you might want to follow the historical ones, could have been done differently. All right. So, some locations start the game with garrisons. And I guess you can create new garrisons in other locations because I've got extra counters for garrisons here. So I could like detach a strength point, a couple strength points in Danzig. Whoa! Wait a minute, wait a minute. Some of these might be replacements. Oh no, that's a Prussian. Okay, that's Prussian and this is French. We got the Prussian-French colors closer to right this time, although the Prussians are a little too pale, but okay. So yeah, I'm figuring that I can shove troop strengths in there. It doesn't really say anything about detaching into them, but maybe it says elsewhere. Specifics about the lines of communication. These generally follow the base rules. We've got 9 different weather types, which are going to be specified somewhere. I don't think there's a role for weather. Damned if I know where it is. Some of these, this is just a write-up, but some of these player aids are fairly flimsy pieces of paper, as opposed to, you got the sequence of play in the game though in a separate sheet. That's kind of useful. And then some information on each of the cards. And I don't see anything about the weather on any of this. This is a weird, it's an optional rule, but it seems to just be a notational player aid. All right, so I can't find the weather information. See the weather table and track. All right, we have the weather track here. I don't know whether weather table is. Oh, maybe it's here. Here we go. Another chart. Okay. And this one's on stock. Seems like, so they've got the effects spelled out here. So mud has an A effect. Secondary rivers cost an extra movement point. And that's going to be on the river column. Attrition column, mud is going to give you a B and a little thing that says it's only for the French. They take an extra attrition die roll modifier for battle. Oh, for the scenario, for the battle scenarios, not for battle. Or it's going to be an extra, I guess that's a strength point loss in campaigns. I don't know. C is going to be on initiative. You get a bad. So this is funny. It's on the mud too. I wasn't expecting that, but it's like in Napoleon at Bay, the rain and the snow makes it so that you can sneak up on the enemy because he has a harder time getting away from you. And then, what else is it? But you're going to have a harder time pursuing him after the battle. Okay, E, Cav and Vedette attrition. Okay. And vedettes may not repulse, and if eliminated, do not return to the vedette pool. Normally, vedettes are just this infinite resource. But here, if it's really severe weather, they have a problem there. But they also don't seem to be affected by the attrition in that case. And maybe that's an error. Garrisons are allowed to attack just as if they're a regular unit. But the thing is, they're not allowed to move. So I don't know why they have a pursuit. Well, if they're pursued. Another table indicates combat effects. Okay. So, in the prior Napoleon at Bay and any of the other games, really, is the concept of affecting terrain. And they give a list of all the different... to wet my fingers to see. And basically, it's a column shift as to whether you're in good defensive terrain. Now, what they decide is affecting in this is fortified town, capital city, hill woods, where the defender is in the hex, or secondary river and bridge hexes attacked across. Then you get the affecting table and you get that column shift. Non-affecting is clear woods and swamp, but swamp has a special... so does woods. Swamp, maybe woods had one in the other one too. I know it did in 6 days. The strength of any unit attacking into or out of a swamp is halved. Cav is halved when defending in a swamp. In which case, people attacking into it are attacking it. It all works out normally, I guess. Except that fractions are rounded up, so maybe you get an edge. The strength of infantry units attacking into woods is reduced by 1/4. Oh god, there certainly wasn't something like this. And cav is reduced by a half. Artillery in woods may not bombard. A target unit in woods may not be bombarded. Blocked line of sight. But if you were on the edge of the woods, it would be very bad, because that would just generate fragments of the trees and stuff. But I guess they're looking at it as you're deep enough in the woods that you can't get a good line of sight for bombardment. Woods with hills is considered affecting terrain. Yeah, we got that. Okay. Towns and citadels, fortified towns and citadels are forts. Now, do we have what fortified towns look like? Fortified towns look like forts. Okay. And citadels look like smaller forts. Alrighty. Zones of control do not extend into them, but they extend out of them. However, see something. Alright, yeah. Masking forces not having to attack. Attacking and counterattacking is not mandatory for the force inside the fort. Up to 48 strength points can be in the hex. That's the normal stacking limit here. So, gone is this stupid, wherever it was, there was a horrible stacking limit rule where it's based on how many command points of units you have or something. That was in Napoleon at Bay, and also I think in 6 days, but I don't know. Now 6 days had something simple but kind of goofy, which was like a corps can stack together or 2 units, which the units worked differently there, though. They were step loss units, so conceivably you could make a better argument than you can make for in this to have that kind of thing. Here, it's just how many strength points you have, and that works so much better. It may not be easy to figure out, but I don't think stacks will have 48 strength points. That sounds really huge to me for the system. But anyway, only up to 5 can get the terrain benefits from a fortified town or citadel. And what that means is the others are outside and will have to fight a field battle. You can use the 5 if you want, but if you don't declare some of your strength points to be in the citadel, you might lose it. And that's one of the things garrisons are good for. They can hold it and like keep you from making little mistakes. Okay, and you're allowed to have a force inside the fort or citadel and a force outside. Normally you can't have 2 forces in the same space. If you can't command the entire stack, you're overstacked and you bump out. Okay, units in a fortified town have their defending in the town, have their combat strength doubled up to a maximum of 5 extra strength points. Well, you can only have 5 strength points in that town, but that's not the walls defending you. This is like militia or something like that, or the defensive benefits of operating near the town. because it gets added to the actual defense rather than to any kind of siege operations there. During artillery bombardment, you include a modifier for artillery fire into a fortified town. If there are any troops outside the town, undoubled but in the hex, the modifier is only +1. Bombardment first affects the units outside. Citadel may not be attacked and bombardment is ineffectual. Looks like fortified towns can be attacked. However, you have to look at the siege rules. Okay. During the combat phase, you can try to mask or surround an enemy-occupied fort. If you have the right strength value, which is 2/3 of the strength points of the face value of all enemy forces in the hex, then you are allowed to roll on here to see if you succeed. And depending on how long you've been trying to mask, the easier it is. And I guess on a dot, it's an automatic mask. Yeah. This is the first step to laying siege to a fortification. Nobody can enter or leave the fort once it's masked. The fort inside has no line of communications or dispatch distance. And masked forces may attack, but are considered entirely outside their fortification when they attack or counterattack, so they don't get any of the bonuses. Forces in the same hex as friendly fortifications may ignore a retreat result on the CRT. They are not required to retreat out of the hex. Now, wait a minute. I remember this being modified. This is 49. Okay, maybe this is not here and it's in some other errata that was online that I found. So we'll just go with the rules as written. Unless that doesn't make sense, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that changed. Forces within a fort do not suffer attrition, whether masked or not. Garrison markers on the map suffer no attrition. A force that doesn't move and a force that's only one strength point never suffers attrition. You might be masked at the start of the battle, at the start of the game. There are some garrisons. You can put them on any friendly citadel, fortified town, or capital city, and you just have to create the strength points. So the names that are on them don't matter. Those are just maybe set up names for certain scenarios where they're already in place. What's going to be tough is seeing where these forts are. You know, I mean, they're visible, but this map does kind of blur. The roads are hard enough to see. Seeing these little stars, especially wherever the tiny ones are, which I do not see at all. And then stuff like this, the depots. This stuff's going to all kind of blend in, and, you know, the strategic situation... Oh, this tiny one. The strategic situation as presented by the map is not, you know, glaringly obvious. Instead, there's beauty being presented, which means you won't be able to strategize. It's very similar to 6 Days of Glory on this, or my very recent Web and Starship, where, you know, the game just becomes frustrating because the components are too difficult to read. And boy, was that frustrating in that. But again, you know, 6 days, probably the map caused 50% of my problems. More of it if you count the fact that it pooches. But once I put Plexi on it. This pooches too, but it's not that heavy Clash of Arms stock that's so wonderful to touch but can't be played on. And yeah, I bought another Clash of Arms game. Oops. I just picked up Prague from the Age of Reason stuff. Okay, you can suck up your garrisons and take them with you. Alright, I need a break. My hand's killing me. This is just going to take forever to wade through these suckers. Okay. So now sieges aren't handled here. The next thing is sea transport. The coalition player is allowed to move by sea after March 15th if the weather is not lousy. And it's going to require a card to have been played. Now, you move a Russian division from Königsberg, Pillau, or elsewhere on the coast, and it can go into a coastal or port destination. You can embark at any coastal hex. You suffer no attrition during the sea move. You can't be in an enemy zone when you leave. You can land in an enemy zone. You'll have to fight. If you have to retreat, then you go back to sea. And oh no, you're eliminated if forced to retreat. Okay. Alright, there's a road that's unbuilt. It's got a dashed line in it running all the way from Ostend down, I think, to Warsaw. And I think this is a French highway being built here. Before March 21st, the road is a secondary road. On and after that, it becomes a primary road. And if you remember, the primary roads are necessary for tracing back to your supply source. The one exception is the French are going to be using this path instead. Okay, you take additional losses if you're pursued across a river. However, it's done. If it's retreating across a secondary river or across a bridge at a primary, it doesn't make a difference. If you can retreat off the map edge. And the pursuit ends at the map edge hex. And if you retreat off a friendly map edge, you can come back the next turn. As if you were a reinforcement. Alright. Now, those are the rules that you work with the basic game under, except, you know, and whatever I talked about with the cards, you don't use them. You use, I think, the standard rules for the operational, but you don't have ops points or anything. You just use the column on here. All right. We don't use that in the campaign game. We use what's on the cards. All right, vedettes are going to be like little cav units, except there's some infantry Prussian vedettes, which work the same, except I guess they move slower. Because there's hidden movement, you know, units are flipped over and look like that, and there's going to only be one counter per hex, it's not going to be clear what you're facing at any given time. You just know that there's something there. So the vedettes are sort of like dummy counters, but they're a little bit stronger than that in that they can scout out stuff. They have a movement of 7 movement points. They don't take any kind of attrition. They don't have to roll for initiative, but you can pretend to roll for initiative. One of their suggestions is to hide your initiative rolls so that you're not giving away that it's a real force or not. Generally, with this kind of game, if I'm playing this opposed with this kind of secret movement, I just don't look at the board, you know, when the opponent's going. That's kind of probably the best way to handle it, because that way they can flip up their counters and look at them. The vedettes are revealed whenever they're adjacent to an enemy. Once they're revealed, they stay that way until they move. As soon as they move, then they're flipped, and it doesn't really matter where they move. They don't take initiative rolls. They can't damage bridges, they can't capture pontoons, they can't cut lines of communication. Now this, except for Cossacks. This is important because at certain times, and 6 Days had this kind of crap too, at certain times you might not look like you can trace a line of communication, but then the other guy has to reveal, oh yeah, you can. You know, that's just a vedette. So you do have to spend some effort paying attention to what the other guy is doing on his turn, I guess. They don't have generals. They don't interfere with a line of communication or dispatch distance. If someone has a problem, if someone looks like they have a problem with a line of communication, they can ask if it is indeed blocked. However, they have to use that line of communication. So, yeah. which means that if you have another line that the vedette or the counter is not blocking, you probably need to use that so that you don't end up out of supply if that's real. All right. When an enemy force enters a zone of control bond that has a vedette in it, the owning player must reveal the vedette, but only after his opponent has declared whether he'll attempt to repulse one of the units. The enemy unit may continue moving through or around the hex containing the vedette, ignoring the zone of control once it's been revealed. You can't end your move in the same hex as the vedette. A screen of them cannot prevent the movement of a force trying to reinforce a battle. Yeah. Although the force must pay an additional movement point to repulse, a force which begins its move in a ZOC bond must begin by attempting to repulse. The vedettes themselves, if they attempt to repulse, they get to figure out who the force leader is, and then they retreat before combat. Even during a force march, the vedette always retreats before combat. Vedettes in combat, they are compelled to attack unless they retreat before combat. They can follow through with a regular attack in order to obtain the exact strength of the enemy forces. This will kill the vedette, but that may not be a big deal because it just goes over into the pool of unused vedettes, and you'll be able to bring it back on the map, unless the weather's terrible. If a vedette's forced to retreat or suffers any combat strength loss on the combat table, it's removed from the map and placed on a leader's portrait of a friendly force within 7 movement points or 4 movement points for infantry. While it's on the display, it has 0 strength and it's ignored, but during the organization segment, it can take off from the leader and go do something else. If it can't reach any of these leaders, it goes into the vedette pool. Strength of a vedette cannot be incorporated into regular units in any way except for Platov. He's got some special rule here because he's Cossack. When 2 or more vedettes are together in the same hex, only one stays on the map, the other one is going to be removed as if it was destroyed in combat. The vedettes are allowed to retreat before combat. It's automatic. And they get the approximate strength of an enemy occupied hex in step 3A of the combat procedure. So I did not go too deeply into the combat procedure. I just kind of glossed over what I remember about it. And this is not one of those things. So let's see. 3A. You round forces to the nearest 5 strength points and inform what they have. And this is in order to decide what type of battle each person is going to do. So you have some pretty good idea of what the forces are. And then you're allowed to retreat. The enemy can't pursue. Infantry vedettes can't retreat before combat. And if they do not auto-retreat, then they must fight. Okay. Vedettes and their zones of control don't interfere with enemy units' retreats or pursuits during the combat phase. Units always can ignore them when retreating or pursuing. If there's no other alternative, they can go right through the vedette. If there's no other path, and the enemy player has to reveal the vedette-only hexes that may be revealed, may be retreated through. If they can't trace a dispatch distance to the center of operations, supply source, or friendly depot, I bet you they disappear. Yep, they go to the nearby leader's track, except for Cossacks and Free Corps. Now, Cossacks and Free Corps have special things. These have a red unit type symbol. Jeez. I'm assuming there's one of such somewhere, but I don't see. Maybe there's one on the board somewhere. I don't know. There's one. Free Corps have an FK on them. These listed vedettes can cut the French line of communication. Platov's 3 vedettes can be stacked together and replaced by a parent combat unit, which is probably in my pile of, gee, what are these? Platov's cav has a circled numeral indicating the number of vedettes associated with that unit. If these vedettes appear on the map, then the Platov unit must be removed from play. The Freikorps were volunteer militia, Marwitz. I don't know what that matters. All vedette rules apply to the Freikorps, and all the Cossack exceptions apply to Platov's Cossack cavalry unit. Freikorps are eliminated for any reason or permanently out of play, so they're not really vedettes. Okay. Administration is the funky thing. So now you can go from the supply source to a depot to the unit for attrition, or the supply source to the center of operations, and then following dispatch distance for either attrition, and this is dispatch distance too, for either attrition or for a movement command to be spent. You have to be in range of the center of operations to get an active movement command. Okay. God, my hand's killing me. I gotta pause. If I can. So unlike in the core rules, when you roll on the administrative table here, wherever that's hidden, over here, which is per country and the time of year and how far you are from your supply source, same as everything else in the system. You get a number. Well, that number, instead of being a number of command points you get, well, or as command points, means that you just draw some cards off of here. And each nation has, well, each coalition, the French and the coalition, each have their own deck of cards. Then you must play 1 card for operational intent, and this is going to be your first card played, and it's going to, as I said before, it's going to affect all your initiative movement, and as well as that first unit's movement. Now, when you play a card, you're allowed, you specify the movement allowance on the card, and we already talked, that's up here. Let's see what that's broken down as. Oh shit, got a drippy nose. Okay, maybe they don't break it down for you. Ah, crap. Alright. Maybe it's over here in the original set of rules, even though they don't cover cards for the most part. You don't know. No. Alright, so they don't break it down, so we gotta kind of guess what these things mean. It's got a movement allowance for the force and includes event instructions, which will be here. During the movement command segment, the attrition for each force is determined by this special little attrition table, which is based on how many cards or command points that you've got in reserve in your hand at the time that you make that check. Special rules handling the center of operations, similar to the Napoleon FA and other systems. You have to maintain your line of communications. The French army traces to a supply source on the F, and that can include 0139, which I guess is probably here. If you're following the towpath for your supply. Enemy zones of control don't affect the line of communication. It's 21 movement point distance. So now, this is sort of the opposite of what Napoleon at Bay did, where you're actually worried about the movement points for the line of communication. This is just going to always be kind of a pain in the butt to figure out what you've got here. So yeah, this specifies on the chart that it's movement points. Napoleon at Bay specified how many primary road hexes. It all works out the same, but Königsberg, if it's coalition control, the Russians can change their active source to Königsberg. Yeah. Danzig, if the French occupied Danzig, they can move their source up here. Warsaw can be my source. Notice there's a little supply source marker there. In order to do this, though, you have to control Warsaw itself and this entire towpath going along that side of the river. It's important that it's that side of the river because the enemy can't interfere with it, even if, you know, they're sitting across the river and, well, remember, zones don't affect it. But if the enemy puts a force of at least 2 strength points in a towpath hex, that's going to block things, and then Warsaw becomes a depleted depot. Depots. We have depots on the map. They're these little green things. Forces can trace dispatch distance to a depot with a valid line of communication to use attrition rate or receive replacements, but they can't use them to issue movement commands. Any friendly supply source, even an inactive one, can act as a depot for attrition purposes. The depot has to have a line of communications to any friendly supply source. It doesn't have to be your active one. They don't require garrisons. A depot class, letter A through C, indicates player control at start. Yeah, well, okay. I don't know where it says this. But, yeah, whatever. The letter code specifies the ones at the start, who owns it at the start of a given scenario. All depots are fully functional at the start of each scenario for attrition and remain friendly until they're occupied by enemy forces or they lose their line of communication. And here's the thing, you can use a depot whichever side you are. A depot is depleted if an enemy force of any type within dispatch distance of its own depot or center of communication blocks the line of communication. And then there's the depleted depot can be used 1 turn with an attrition penalty, modifier of 1, and then the following turn it'll be deactivated unless the line of communication is restored. And there's no counters or anything to support this. You just have to mark them some other way. We can use chips or something. Okay. You get your cards. Now, unlike games like Wellington, well, I don't know. There's 2 ways to look at this. You can play this as a 2-player or 3-player game. If you separate the coalition out, I think they each get their own hand of cards. But we're going to be doing it 2-player, in which case the Prussian and Russian hands are added together. And I think they add them together no matter what in terms of what their total supply source is, the number of points. Replacements, same as Napoleon at Bay. Points come in, they're tracked. Here we've got counters this time to handle them. And there's artillery in there too, as well as the infantry and cav, and then there's also counters for the guard. And then in order to get them, you have to, well, run from a depot or the center of operations. That's for infantry. Cav have to be in a depot with a line of communications. Some leaders don't begin the game. They're on the reinforcement chart. Blucher. Blucher's got special rules. He's a prisoner of war at the start of the first scenario, which is what we're gonna be playing the Grand Campaign, which starts as the first campaign scenario. His counters begin CS1 under the French player's control. If any French or French allied leader is captured, after one complete turn, he can be exchanged for Blucher at the French player's option. And the two become reinforcements after an additional turn. And then you use Blucher's, I don't know. Blucher will never arrive if that transfer isn't made. He's got an arrival in a scenario which assumes the trade. Russian card number 4 calls for the withdrawal of Buxhausen. Other leaders may be withdrawn as called for by pursuit events table. Yeah. So there's this table here, which we'll see how that works. I have no idea. When a leader is removed, they get replaced with a replacement leader or major general as necessary. And that's why there's replacement leader, but I don't know, is Poniatowski a replacement leader? How come Savary is a replacement leader, but he starts the game in the reinforcement slot? I just don't know. We'll fudge that as much as we can. Ney. Whenever Ney rolls an initiative roll and gets a 6, hey, let's take a look at Ney. Okay, so he can fail on a 5 and nothing happens. But if he fails on a 6, he decides to do something random, and you roll a die and he heads off in that direction. Okay. Murat, Bernadotte, Davout, Massena, Ney, Constantine, and Bennigsen all hate each other. What that means is these leaders who have their own subordination rating, it goes up to a 4, which is, what it would cost to try to put, of course Bernadotte's a 4 anyway. If you try to put Napoleon under someone, you would never want to do that. But anyway, it makes it more difficult to organize their commands. And then we have, what really is kind of the normal. Okay, yeah, so your movement allowance is going to be determined for an initiative by this card somehow. Now there's 3 numbers up at the top, and I don't know what they mean. We haven't found anything that divides them up and explains them. I would assume it would be in the specific rules, but I don't see a picture or anything. Here we go. Okay, so we have movement allowance. Let's see if we can see this. If we zoom in. Okay, movement allowance is 3-4, whatever that means. And order acceptance over here is a 5, whatever that means. Gosh, I don't know. All right. If the movement allowance is 2 numbers, yeah, the second number is the Cav movement. Reinforcements come on the board. Yeah. The number of cards you have in the hand as soon as you try to do a movement is going to affect your chart here, as of course is the size of the force. And then what do you get? See, unlike this attrition table, which we figured out after a while, but we're not going to be using. I don't know if there's a die roll in this one. You got the card, so you get some choice there. But yeah, I think you take the effect from there. All right. And I'm not sure what the pluses mean. Perhaps additional losses due to forced march, but we don't know where that is yet. Center of operation pops just like it does in the other. Okay, cards. So now here, the player may select cards also indicate if the player may select a pitched battle. It sounds to me like you need a pitched battle card to do that. I don't know. We'll keep going. And also an order acceptance die roll required and any enduring effect. Well, the enduring effect would be included in there. Cards with the same card number and title are identical per side, except for movement and attrition may vary. The movement allowance is 2 numbers. This is the maximum movement for forces moving under that card. If the movement allowance exceeds the normal movement rate, then you're allowed to do an extended march. I don't think you need to play an extra card for that. Normally you'd have to play an extra command to do that. Some cards have an enduring effect. You have to put them aside and put some kind of counter on it. Players can only choose to fight a pitched battle if the op-int card specifies this option for all friendly forces or for a specific force moved individually. So I guess if you play op-int with a pitched battle, you're going to be allowed to do them no matter what. If you play an op-int without a pitched battle, you can only choose it if the movement card that you played has a pitched battle. How does this affect the non-active player? I don't know. We'll keep seeing. During your forced march segment, a card is played to establish the movement allowance and attrition for all forces. If no forces are going to force march, no card needs to be played. No instructions are used during forced march. You get your cards, I think you reshuffle. I don't know. Before the game you shuffle. And you draw some start cards. You can hide your cards. You don't even have to tell them how many you have. After your friendly player turn, cards played are placed in a discard pile unless the instructions say to do something else. A card is only discarded as the cost of an action is played in the discard pile for possible reuse. Some cards, though, will say you have to get rid of it. Now, those cards only are out of the game if you play them for the event. And I think they actually are supposed to go back in the damn deck. But you have to try to remember. I don't know. We're not doing that. Some are must-play cards. Hold on. When using a card as an event, follow the text of the instructions. If you don't fulfill the instructions on the card, the enemy player gets an additional card immediately. Okay. So I guess that's if you choose not to play the event, you give a card to somebody. Many cards allow the player to suspend a rule, for example, Zone of Controls. Okay. A card may be played as a movement command only, or as a movement command plus an event, or discarded as the cost of changing a supply source. When you play a movement card, the recipient force is not required to execute the text as instructed. You may use the card as an event card, or just as its movement allowance. Now here, there's no indication of that penalty, and it seems like it's like this one throwaway sentence. When using a card as an event card, follow the instructions. If you don't fulfill the instructions, the enemy player gets to draw an extra card. I don't know what that means. Maybe if the card doesn't work anymore, but you've decided to play it as an event anyway. I really don't know what they're talking about. And this doesn't get covered here. Okay. Cards may say no event if played as op-int, which means if you play it as an operational intent, you don't get the event. Some may say they only work as, I don't know. Cards take place as soon as they're played, and they last through the friendly player turn, but maybe they last longer. If you move units without paying a movement command, okay. Pontoons, unemployed leaders, centers of... By the way, I can find nothing in the reinforcements or setup about pontoons, so... We'll look harder, but they're not listed. And vedettes don't require a movement command, and they can spend their maximum movement allowance. Excuse me. Cards sometimes give free movement commands. You don't draw a new card. The movement allowance and attrition is governed by the awarding card. If cards can't affect other cards' instructions. If there's a conflict, the last played card prevails. Some enduring effects will apply during the enemy combat phase will intersect with the enemy player's card. Whatever that's supposed to all mean, we don't know. And then they give an example, which kind of indicates a sort of contradictory situation. And if we ever have something that confuses me, we'll treat it as that. Some cards have a prerequisite. A card number 4 for the French must be played before number 1. Yeah, that makes sense. 12 must be played before 13. If there's no prerequisite, then the card instructions may be gained without further requirement. What that's supposed to mean, I don't know. I assume they have to be played for the event, and I assume you have to somehow keep track of those. If they get shuffled back in, that's terrible. Some cards have an order acceptance rating between 5 and 7. The player wishes to use the instructions. This is the modified die roll needed to accept orders. Roll the die and add the leader's initiative. The total must exceed the printed rating. If the total does not exceed the order acceptance rating, the leader doesn't get the instructions. In addition, his force loses a strength point, but he still gets his movement allowance and his bonus attrition. And they show a couple examples of that, but it seems pretty straightforward. Oh. Okay, you can do administrative march here. Now, is this only by certain specific cards? I don't know. The approach march card allows a force to move during each friendly movement phase that the order is in effect. That sounds kind of like it. I assume you have to have an administrative march card of some sort to do this. And the force will head towards an objective hex, much like in Napoleon at Bay, except instead of being limited to one at a time, you're limited by the card mix. Reinforcing forces can be placed under administrative march on the turn of its map entry if you play the approach march card. Okay, so it really does sound like that card is important. And you have to write down where it's going. It goes, an administrative march ends if you get to your location, your destination. If you enter a zone of control, if it's a vedette, though it doesn't count. And also, if you're within dispatch distance of the center of operation within a friendly command phase, and the objective hex could be changed, or you could just stop. When a force is assigned to a map edge supply source objective arrives at the map edge, it may exit its forces at the player's option. Okay. French card 28 and Coalition card 24, I guess, can be played as an EC, an event. It must be played on the operational intent. I assume it says it on there. And it's a retreat. And I hope it tells you more, because this doesn't give much information. I don't know if it's like, all your forces can retreat, or just that one unit is stuck in some kind of weird administrative retreat. Russian forces can leave the map at any coalition mappage supply source and enter into cantonment. By playing card 13 as an event, and it must be played as operational intent. As soon as the first force exits the map, Paris morale improves by 1, and this is not reversible when the units re-enter. If the card is played again another time, Paris morale improves again as soon as first forces leave. While in cantonment, forces cannot be attacked and suffer no attrition. The card can be cancelled at any time, as per Administrative March. Okay. When all summer, none of the Russian forces may have exited. Russian forces must continue to move directly to the map edge until the cantonment is cancelled. Okay, once they're in cantonment, they return to the same hex they exited from. Hey, you gotta write that down. However, maybe something else happens. Looks like there's some kind of movement off map. Okay. There's no minimum time off map unless the force moved to a different hex for re-entry. The minimum time off map in that case is explained there. Any road crossing a primary bridge, yeah, bridges, same as before. Damaging. Force adjacent to a bridge hex side can repair the damaged bridge if an enemy force occupies the adjacent, it cannot be repaired. Okay, let's use wording that's... Bridge trains have no combat strength or subordination, a movement allowance of 4. It may only move as part of a larger force. Okay, so they're not going to operate without commands or initiative. Place the bridge train, yeah, okay. A bridge train cannot create its own major general. Now this is different. They were allowed to do this in the earlier games. They may not retreat. They may not be part of a pursuit force. They cannot be destroyed, damaged, or repaired. If its force makes a pursuit or is forced to retreat, it gets dropped on the board with travel side up. If the enemy passes through the hex with an undeployed bridge, the bridge train is captured and becomes a friendly bridge train. Deployed ones are pontoons, and the bridge train markers have pontoons on the reverse. Those can bridge... It costs 1 movement point, and the pontoon now counts as a bridge across the river. It can be captured or undeployed if friendly. When it's passed through by a force, it costs 1 additional movement point. Crossing the hex side, I guess that's when you capture or undeploy it. Alright, it's time for another rest. How far are we? 18 out of like 22, so we're making some pretty good headway here. Yeah, let's see if we can get through the last couple of pages of rules. Off-map movement. You can leave the map on a road. Force leader is removed from the exit hex and is placed on top of a card played from the player's hand. The hidden card that the counter sits upon determines the movement rate for the force. It enters play when its accumulated movement points allow it to re-enter. If they retreat, they're treated like voluntary exits, but only if it's a friendly map edge. You have to discard an extra card to exit voluntarily. 2 cards if during a retreat after combat. Confusion. Place the force leader on top of one of these cards. Forces which retreat the non-friendly map edge are eliminated. There's no pursuit. So you can remain off map indefinitely in cantonment. While off map, you may not be reorganized, i.e. no extra troops or anything. An exited force re-enters like a reinforcement. They must first check for attrition using the attrition given on the card they're placed on as their march distance. If they re-enter at the exit hex, or according to the distance to the actual re-entry hex. To determine the range of possible re-entry hexes, multiply the number of turns since the force exited by the movement rate, and it can go on any friendly primary or secondary road within that number of movement points from the original exit hex. So you just count along the edge of the board, I guess. Okay, sieges. Okay, so the Siege of Danzig was apparently a major facet of this campaign. Lasting almost 2 months. Only the French player can conduct a siege. They can only do 1 at any given time, and it can only be against an enemy citadel. So here would be Danzig Citadel, I guess. Oh wait, no, this is the Citadel. This is a fort? Yeah, this is a little fortified town of Wiedeschmuldel. I don't know. Okay. First you have to successfully mask the fortress and then construct 3 parallels. Each parallel requires a card play. Can't be during frost, snow, or severe weather, nor before the Chasseloup Engineer card, number 12, has been played. No more than 1 parallel or sight batteries can be played in a turn. Now, I don't know if those are specific cards. It appears that they are parallel sight batteries. And that may be like there's 3 in the deck of the parallels. I don't know. Is that specified on here? Yeah, so they specify, and there are, well, I don't know. This says see raid below for full text of the raid card. That seems completely random to me. I don't know. Alright. Well, we'll figure this out as we play it, I guess. After playing the first parallel, you place the besieged marker on the citadel, and there's one of them in addition to the masked markers. After the 3 parallels, the French player can begin to play sight batteries. Once the first sight batteries card is played, you can begin to roll on the negotiation table. And you start discussing whether or not there's going to be a surrender. RA is roll again at the end of the next turn. N is negotiations ensue, and that N will be followed by a number, which is how many turns until the surrender actually occurs. If you get a dot, you have to play another sight battery to get another negotiation shot. You won't get to roll each turn. Sorties are raided by the garrison. This is why. Upon the works of the besiegers, the total sorties mounted by the fortress garrison provides the column heading on the result for negotiations. So the more sorties played, the less likely you're going to get a negotiation. There's no combat lost to either side in a sortie. No more than 1 can be played in a turn. A sortie can also be played as a raid anywhere. And that may be the deal that this says parallels and probably should be a sorties card instead, but I don't know. We don't. Oh, how to play without cards. So, yeah, you can use APs and just keep track of them. Ignore op-in. It looks like there's some things, though, that kind of require the cards, like the siege and such, not where, I don't know. It doesn't look like there's a real easy option there. Ignore exclusive rules 128 to 146. Huh. Are we in there? No, we're past there. I don't know. All right, well. Okay. During the French movement command segment, in which the French forces have at least 1 battery sighted, and there's been no relief of the fortress, the French player will roll on the negotiation table. Yeah, unless the batteries got negated. And there's modifiers based on the number of batteries you play. A relief. Okay, what about relief forces here? That's what we're trying to see. If the negotiation results, okay. A relief force is an outside force which attacks any part of the besieging force or masking force. Only need to attack 1 hex. In a relief attack, add 1/2 the strength of the troops in the citadel if you played a sortie card. If the besiegers lose the combat and retreat, the works are now destroyed, and the siege is lifted, and they'd have to start all over again, masking and everything. If the relief fails, well, then the siege continues. Redoubts. Now this is weird because this readout here is listed as being French, but the Russians are in the hex with it, and I'm not sure, but I'm assuming it's a mistake. A redoubt occupied by a force containing at least one strength point of artillery allows the occupying force to ignore enemy zones of control extending into the redoubt, like a fortified town or a hasty fortress. Those were in one of the games I played recently. I don't remember what. Okay, if there's no artillery inside the redoubt, then it's not going to help you with the zone of control. To build a redoubt, you need at least 4 infantry strength points remaining in the hex commanded by the same leader for a full game turn. They cannot move in either player turn. Place a redoubt marker face down during the consolidation segment, and at the end of the complete turn, you turn it face up. Redoubts cannot be built by a force commanded by a major general. They cannot be built when it's cold or yucky. Once placed on the map, the redoubt is fixed in position and may not be moved. Up to 4 infantry strength points within the redoubt are doubled in their defensive strength value. A vacant redoubt gets removed from play, though. Oh, well, yes, it can be removed. And it doesn't look like, I don't know if there's a limit to how many you can build. Attrition. When you move, you're going to have to take attrition. If you don't move, you don't take attrition, which is different from the earlier games I've seen. Also, if you're only 1 strength point, you do not take attrition. If a force of 2 or more strength points moves less than the indicated movement allowance for the card, it still loses full attrition value indicated on the card. Now that's different. You used to be able to move slowly and keep your attrition low. But here you have control over the card, so we'll see how that all works out. An attrition result with a plus adds 1 strength point of loss if the weather is a B, or if you're force marching, or if Paris morale is negative. Okay. Cav and Vedette attrition during frost, snow, and in March, April, May. It's hard to feed the horses. Any cav in a force always takes the first strength point of attrition in these weather. And vedettes suffer any retreat result, including repulse, or permanently eliminated. Force march. If you do a force march, you have to play a card, which is like the operational intent card, but is used for all force marches in the segment. Only the movement value and attrition rates of the card played for the force march are used, and the instructions on the card don't apply. Now, force march... See, there's 2 terms. Force march is playing on the opponent's turn to move your own forces. So it's an operational intent card that you play during the opponent's turn to give you your march rate and your attrition chart for the force march table. And if you recall, force march was the penalty on here. You get the +1. If you take that, I believe. Right? Or is it the extended march? I don't remember now. If you've got really heavy attrition, the bonus star helps you, but otherwise it doesn't. That's kind of a bone. Maybe more realistic, but kind of a bone. Okay, for the phasing player, pitched battle is an option only if a force moved under a card that allows a pitched battle, whether it was operational intent or the specific movement card. So that means if you give an order, you're not going to be able to pitch battle with that force. Now this is weird because force definition at the moment of battle is different from for movement. So that's kind of funky, and I don't know if it'll work. You can always choose pursuit. The non-phasing player's choice of battle type is not limited by cards. When you reveal a battle type, you indicate the card that your force moved under. If a pitched card, you simply state whether you choose pitched or not. If more than one card is involved in a battle and at least one card allows pitched battle. Oh, okay, so if multiple forces moved. Pursuit events table. Now that's on the back here. Each time your army commander is in a retreat or you lose a critical battle and your forces pursued at least 1 hex. Okay, your army commander, like Napoleon. You must roll on the pursuit events table. You roll 2 dice separately. You get a 11 to 66 roll, and you follow the event. Paris morale. French morale is on the track. If it falls off the track, the game is over. If the scenario ends, if it's positive, it's a French victory. Negative, it's a coalition victory. 0, the coalition gets a tactical victory as opposed to operational. Whatever that means. Okay, Paris morale can change due to the capture of capital cities and other conditions listed below. Each monthly interphase, if the coalition has 14 or more Russian strength points within 5 hexes of either Allenstein or Pultusk, but not both, Paris morale is reduced by 1 step. Now this is weird. What, not both? Is that what they really mean? This effect is cumulative. What? In 1806, this is only Pultusk. In 1807, it applies to either. I cannot make my mind as to what this means. It maybe is in the errata, I don't know. Königsberg, Warsaw, Pultusk, Thorn, and Danzig are all capital cities. When you capture them, the morale goes 1 in your favor. And if it's recaptured, it goes the other way. If Paris morale is negative, the French player adds 1 strength point of loss on plus results. So we got it all here. Critical battles, all the normal stuff is in here too. Okay. Poles. If either Warsaw or Pultusk is occupied by coalition forces, Polish recruitment is considered disrupted. Polish reinforcements that are supposed to arrive are permanently lost. Exception, leader reinforcements. Yeah, well, we don't know when Poniatowski comes in because he's not on the list. The occupying... This is par for the course with Zucker's stuff. Leader reinforcements, yeah, right. The occupying force must remain in town to effect the disruption. If any one of Bronzenberg, Preußischlau, or Friedland is occupied by the French, Prussian recruitment is disrupted. They don't get any replacement points. Austrians, when Paris morale gets to -3, or if the French play the Polish question card, the French player must consult the realignment table, rolling 1 time over here. And what do we get? The result states which turn the Austrian Empire intervenes. Now that's a turn number. I don't know what that means if you've passed it. Maybe they just automatically come in right then. I don't know. Let's keep looking. On behalf of the coalition, when that turn arrives, Galicia is no longer neutral. It's going to be kind of to the south somewhere. Looks like it's over here. And Archduke Charles appears as a coalition reinforcement. This force doesn't take attrition, but must never move more than 5 hexes beyond the map edge. However, it can move anywhere in Galicia up to 5 hexes beyond the Galician frontier. If the coalition controls Warsaw, Warsaw becomes a depot and supply source for the Austrians, and the Austrians can go anywhere. But there's no supply source garrison. Each monthly interphase thereafter, the Austrian forces get an infantry replacement point. This is turns in the future, not the number. And if you get a star, it says try again in 1809. I don't think the game goes that far. It's 1 year. Right. Okay. Some optional rules here. The sound of the guns. So a force that failed a regular forced march initiative and began within 3 hexes of a friendly force that's about to be attacked. Now, these rules are different in different situations. Sometimes it's just a bonus to your initiative. That force can attempt another forced march before the second round. If it passes its initiative, it sets out on its way and must march to the sound of the guns directly to that battle, expending all movement points to move next to the defending hex, and then the force must check for attrition before joining the battle as normal. Battlefield dynamics. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. Before you counterattack, the player who's about to attack has to roll the dice, modifying for cav differential, which is the 2 to 1, I guess. And there should be some chart somewhere. We don't know where. Maybe there isn't, you know. We assume, and yeah, we don't see it. So we assume there's no chart, and maybe it'll be spelled out here. Okay. If the modified die roll is less than his force leader's initiative, the player keeps control of the battle. If he rolls equal to his force leader's initiative, he's not allowed to attack. His battle round half is skipped, his forces stay in place, and the enemy can continue the pitched battle with a follow-up counterattack, providing he selected pitched battle. I don't know why he had to select it. I really just don't know. If you roll greater than the initiative by 1, you must counterattack. This is the normal rolls. Now, I don't know what control of the battle means. If you can, I don't know. You know, that's not really spelled out here. Like, can you refuse the counterattack if you roll less than? Or is it less than or equal? No, it says less than, you retain control of the battle. Now, normally you don't have this option, so I don't know what's up, but whatever. Here they just say he retains control, you know, whatever. If he rolls greater than the initiative by 2 or more, he has to retreat. Based on the actual die result of the immediately preceding resolution, there will be no pursuit if the enemy did not win the prior combat. We assumed that if the enemy won the prior combat? No. I have no idea how this works. I'm not sure I want to play with it because it doesn't make sense unless I can find something on it. The battle worksheet, I haven't even really looked at it because I looked at the worksheet, I glanced at this. It looks like it's just some means of tracking the battlefield situation. So that is the rules as far as I understand them, which is not terribly well, but that's not unusual for a Zucker design. In fact, the only one I ever feel any comfort playing is that one right there that we had fun with, the Napoleon at Bay. Every other one, well, there's always something wacky going on in it. Struggle of Nations, there's so many roles screwed up in that. Even 1809 with victory games in it. And here, you know, we have Mark Herman involved in this, but man, these rules, I can't believe Herman touched any of this. So, I don't know. I think maybe he just came up with the idea of using cards instead and kind of fleshed that out with Zucker and then let Zucker write the rules. Because these rules sure feel like Zucker's rules. And honestly, the standard rules aren't bad, you know. They're not great, but it feels like he's hammered most of the stuff down over, what, 40 years or whatever. The exclusive rules, new things, different, and man, they barely make sense. All right, let's send it up.